Sarah Chen stood before her bathroom mirror, carefully applying the final touches to her disguise. The transformation was remarkable. Gone were her designer clothes and perfectly styled hair. Instead, she wore simple jeans, a plain white shirt, and minimal makeup. Her long black hair was pulled back into a. At just 28, Sarah had accomplished what many considered impossible. Through years of hard work and brilliant strategic decisions, she had built a successful tech investment firm from scratch. Her latest acquisition was Stellar Software Solutions, a promising company with great potential but troubling internal reports about workplace culture. "Remember, you're Sarah Thompson now," she whispered to her reflection. "Just another intern trying to learn the ropes." The plan had been in motion for weeks. Only 3 people knew her true identity: her executive assistant, the head of HR, and the company's legal counsel. To everyone else at Stellar Software, she would be just another fresh graduate joining their 3-month internship program. The drive to Stellar's office building felt different that morning. Instead of pulling into her reserved CEO parking spot in her Tesla, Sarah parked her borrowed Honda Civic in the general parking area. She joined the stream of employees heading into the building, carefully observing their interactions and demeanor. At the reception desk, a friendly security guard checked her temporary ID card. "First day?" he asked with a kind smile. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, intentionally adding a slight tremor to her voice. "I'm the new intern in the software development department." "Ah, you'll be working under Mr. Brooks then. 4th floor." The guard's smile faltered slightly at the mention of the manager's name, a reaction Sarah carefully noted. The elevator ride was crowded with Monday morning commuters. Sarah listened to their conversations, picking up bits and pieces about weekend plans and project deadlines. One conversation, in particular, caught her attention: 2 employees discussing how someone named Richard had done it again for the young Hispanic developer. The software development department was exactly as described in the reports: an open-plan office with clear divisions between teams. Sarah immediately noticed how the seating arrangements seemed segregated, with minority employees clustered in less desirable spots near the noisy break room and printers. "You must be the new intern," a sharp voice cut through her observations. Sarah turned to face Richard Brooks, the department manager. He was a tall man in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit that seemed at odds with the casual dress code followed by other employees. His eyes swept over her dismissively. "Sarah Thompson, sir," she said, extending her hand. Brooks ignored it. "Listen carefully because I won't repeat myself," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Interns here are expected to learn by doing. That means coffee runs, filing, and basic coding tasks if you prove yourself capable. Don't expect special treatment just because of some diversity quota." Sarah felt her jaw tighten but maintained her meek expression. "I understand, sir. I'm here to learn and help in any way I can." "Your desk is over there." Brooks pointed to a small workstation crammed between the printer and a filing cabinet. "Jenny will show you the coffee order system. Everyone's very particular about their drinks here." He walked away without waiting for a response. Jenny, a young Indian-American programmer, approached Sarah with an apologetic smile. "Don't let him get to you," she whispered. "He's like that with everyone who doesn't fit his preferred employee profile." As Jenny showed her around, Sarah observed how different employees reacted to Brooks. The white male employees seemed comfortable, even casual in his presence, while others visibly tensed up when he passed by. She noticed how he interrupted female engineers during discussions but listened attentively to their male counterparts. By lunchtime, Sarah had already filled 2 pages of notes in her phone. The toxic culture wasn't just about isolated incidents. It was systematic and deeply ingrained. Brooks had already assigned her to organize the supply closet, while a white male intern who started the same day was invited to sit in on a client meeting. Sitting alone at her desk with a sandwich, Sarah began formulating her plan. She needed to document everything, build a comprehensive case, and most importantly, understand why such behavior had been allowed to continue unchecked. The next 3 months would require all her self-control and acting skills, but she was determined to see it through. Little did Richard Brooks know, his new diversity hire intern was about to change everything at Stellar Software Solutions. Sarah Chen, disguised as Sarah Thompson, had taken the first step in what would become a watershed moment for the company. 2 weeks into her undercover role, Sarah had witnessed enough discriminatory behavior to fill multiple HR complaints. Richard Brooks had established himself as more than just a difficult boss. He was systematically creating a hostile work environment for minority employees. Every morning began with Brooks scrutinizing Sarah's arrival time, even though she was always 10 minutes early. He would stand near her cramped desk, checking his watch dramatically whenever she walked in. Other interns, particularly white males, could stroll in 15 minutes late without a single comment from him. Thompson, Brooks called out during a particularly busy morning. "My coffee's cold." Again. He walked over to her desk, where Sarah was working on debugging code that another intern had asked for her help with. "I'm sorry, sir," Sarah replied, carefully maintaining her submissive facade. "I'll get you a fresh cup right away. And while you're at it, explain why you're working on David's project when I specifically assigned you to organize the filing system." Sarah noticed how the office grew quiet, everyone pretending to work while actually listening. "David asked for help with a bug in the code, sir. I finished the filing an hour ago." Brooks's face reddened. "So now you're taking tasks without my permission? Who do you think you are?" His voice grew louder with each word. "You're here because of some diversity initiative, not because of your skills. Know your place." From her peripheral vision, Sarah saw Jenny quickly pulling out her phone, discreetly recording the interaction. Several other employees were doing the same, she realized. They'd been documenting Brooks's behavior all along. Later that day, in the break room, Jenny approached Sarah. "We've been keeping records," she whispered, showing Sarah a folder on her phone labeled Brooks Evidence. Videos, emails, screenshots, everything. But nobody dares to report him. His brother-in-law is on the board of directors. Sarah felt her heart sink at this revelation, though she kept her expression neutral. This explained why previous complaints had gone nowhere. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. "Years," Jenny sighed. "We lost some brilliant people because of him. Remember Maria from the UI team? She had amazing ideas for the new interface, but Brooks kept shutting her down, giving her projects to less experienced developers. She left last month for a competitor." As they talked, Brooks entered the break room. He stopped short when he saw them, his eyes narrowing. "Thompson, I don't pay you to socialize. Those quarterly reports won't file themselves." "Actually, sir," Sarah replied quietly, "I finished those an hour ago. They're on your desk." Brooks grabbed a random file from her stack of completed work. "This is completely wrong," he announced loudly, though he hadn't even opened it. "Redo everything. And stop distracting other employees with your chatter." Jenny stood up straighter. "She wasn't distracting anyone, Mr. Brooks. We were discussing the new project requirements." Brooks turned his cold gaze on Jenny. "Perhaps you need a reminder about your own performance review coming up, Ms. Paddle." Sarah watched Jenny's confidence crumble under the thinly veiled threat. This was workplace harassment in its purest form, using power to intimidate and discriminate. That evening, after most employees had left, Sarah stayed behind to complete the reports Brooks had demanded she redo. Through the glass walls of his office, she could see him in a meeting with 3 white male team leaders, laughing and sharing drinks. The same team leaders who had earlier dismissed project proposals from their female and minority team members. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Janet Morris, the HR director who knew her true identity. "How are you holding up?" "It's worse than we thought," Sarah typed back. "The discrimination is systematic, and he's protected by connections to the board. We need to document everything." As she gathered her things to leave, Sarah noticed a small group of employees huddled near the elevator. They quickly dispersed when Brooks emerged from his office, but she caught fragments of their whispered conversation about starting a job search. Walking to her car in the dimming evening light, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. This wasn't just about one bad manager anymore. It was about a system that protected toxic behavior and punished those who spoke up. She needed to be patient, gather more evidence, and plan her next moves carefully. What Brooks didn't realize was that with each discriminatory action, each belittling comment, he was digging his own professional grave. Sarah Chen, disguised as the meek intern Sarah Thompson, was building a case that would soon bring his entire discriminatory empire crashing down. The morning of the incident started like any other at Stellar Software Solutions. Sarah arrived early, made coffee rounds, and settled at her cramped desk, but today was different. It was the quarterly project review meeting where all teams would present their progress. Sarah had spent the previous week helping several team members prepare their presentations, revealing her deep knowledge of coding while maintaining her intern cover. Her assistance hadn't gone unnoticed by Brooks, who grew increasingly agitated as minority team members delivered polished presentations he couldn't easily criticize. The conference room was packed with 30 employees. Brooks sat at the head of the table, his expensive coffee from the artisanal cafe down the street steaming in front of him. Sarah sat in the back corner, taking notes as instructed, though her real purpose was documenting every interaction. Jenny was presenting her team's innovative solution for a major client when Brooks interrupted her for the third time. "This approach is too complicated," he said, drumming his fingers on the table. "We should stick to the basic version David suggested last week." Sarah noticed Jenny's hands trembling slightly as she held her laser pointer. "Sir, with respect, David's version wouldn't meet the client's security requirements. I can demonstrate why." "We're moving on," Brooks cut her off. "Thompson, get me a fresh coffee. This one's cold." Sarah stood up, but instead of heading to the door, she spoke up. "Mr. Brooks, Jenny's presentation isn't finished. The security features she's proposing could save the client millions in potential data breach prevention." The room fell silent. Brooks slowly turned his chair to face her, his face reddening. "Did I ask for your opinion, intern? Know your place." "The client specifically requested enhanced security measures," Sarah continued, her voice steady. "It's in their contract requirements. Page 47, Section 3.2. Brooks stood up abruptly, his hand tightening around his coffee cup. "How dare you question my decisions? Who you think you are?" "Someone who cares about delivering what our clients need," Sarah replied calmly. Several employees were now discreetly pulling out their phones, recording the interaction. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Brooks stepped toward Sarah, his face contorted with rage. "You need to learn respect," he shouted, and then deliberately swung his arm forward, splashing his hot coffee directly at her. Sarah didn't move fast enough. The coffee hit her white shirt, spreading a large brown stain across her chest. The hot liquid burned through the fabric, but she maintained her composure, even as several employees gasped and jumped to their feet. "Oh my God!" Jenny exclaimed, rushing to Sarah with napkins. "Are you okay?" The security cameras in the corners of the conference room had captured everything. Sarah could see their red lights blinking as multiple employees rushed to help her. Brooks stood there, empty cup in hand, seeming to realize too late what he had done. "It was an accident," he said quickly, but his previous shout of "you need to learn respect" had been caught on multiple phone recordings. His deliberate throwing motion was captured from several angles. Janet Morris, the HR director, burst into the room. Someone had called her immediately. "What happened here?" she demanded, though she already knew. She had been watching the security feed from her office. Mr. Brooks threw hot coffee at Sarah. Several voices spoke at once. She was being insubordinate. Brooks defended himself, but his voice lacked conviction as he looked around the room full of witnesses. "Mr. Brooks, come with me immediately," Janet ordered, her voice ice-cold. "Sarah, please go get cleaned up and then come to my office. We'll need to document this incident." As Brooks was led out, Sarah could hear him muttering about diversity hires and not knowing their place. Even now, he couldn't stop himself from revealing his prejudices. In the bathroom, as Sarah dabbed at her stained shirt with cold water, Jenny and several other employees crowded around her. "We got it all on video," they assured her. "You can't get away with this one." Sarah nodded, wincing at the slight burns on her skin. This wasn't how she had planned to reveal her true identity, but Brooks had forced her hand. In one reckless moment, he had given her exactly what she needed: irrefutable evidence of his discriminatory behavior and physical assault, witnessed by an entire room of employees and captured on multiple devices. In an hour, she would walk into that HR meeting not as Sarah Thompson, the intern, but as Sarah Chen, CEO and majority owner of Stellar Software Solutions. And Richard Brooks would finally face the consequences of his actions. The HR office was buzzing with activity as employees lined up to submit their evidence against Brooks. In the 30 minutes since the coffee incident, dozens of videos, photos, and written statements had flooded Janet Morris's inbox. The dam of fear had finally broken, and years of pent-up complaints came pouring out. Sarah sat in the small employee break room adjacent to HR, holding an ice pack to her chest where the coffee had burned her. Jenny hadn't left her side, and other employees kept coming in to check on her and share their own stories of Brooks's misconduct. "I can't believe he finally snapped like that," said Michael, a young black developer who had joined 6 months ago, though I'm not really surprised. "Last month, he accidentally deleted my entire project presentation right before the client meeting and made me look unprepared. Remember when he told Maria her accent was too thick for client calls?" Another employee added. "She spoke perfect English, she just wasn't white enough for him." The security team had already downloaded and preserved the conference room footage from multiple angles. The technical lead, Kevin, came in with his laptop to show Sarah the clear video evidence. "Look at this," Kevin said, playing the footage. "You can see him deliberately aiming the coffee at you. There's no way he can claim this was an accident." The footage was damning. It showed Brooks's progression from irritation to rage, his threatening posture as he approached Sarah, and the calculated way he threw the coffee. The audio clearly captured his discriminatory remarks before and after the incident. Meanwhile, in the HR office, Brooks was attempting to defend himself to Janet Morris. Through the thin walls, Sarah and the others could hear his voice rising in protest. "She was undermining my authority," Brooks shouted. "These diversity hires think they can just walk in and take over. I was making a point. By assaulting an employee," Janet's voice was steel cold. "Mr. Brooks, we have multiple recordings of you explicitly stating you wanted to teach her respect before throwing hot coffee at her. This isn't something you can explain away." Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from her executive assistant. "Legal team standing by. All evidence is being compiled. Ready when you are." Looking around the break room at all the employees who had gathered to support her, whom Brooks had tormented for so long, Sarah felt a surge of determination. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had suffered under his discriminatory leadership. "There's something you all should know," Sarah began, but before she could continue, Brooks burst into the break room, his face red with anger. "You," he pointed at Sarah, "this is all your fault. I built this department from nothing, and I won't let some diversity hire intern destroy my reputation." Security guards appeared behind him immediately. Janet Morris stepped between Brooks and Sarah. "Mr. Brooks, you're not authorized to have any contact with the employee you just assaulted. Please return to my office immediately." "Or what?" Brooks sneered. "My brother-in-law sits on the board. Nothing will happen to me. But you?" He glared at Sarah. "You're finished here." The room had gone completely silent. Everyone was recording again, capturing Brooks's threats and his admission of using his family connections for protection. Sarah stood up slowly, still holding the ice pack. "Actually, Mr. Brooks, I think we should discuss your brother-in-law's board position. Specifically, how it won't help you anymore." "What are you talking about?" Brooks scoffed. Sarah glanced at Janet, who nodded. It was time. But before Sarah could speak, Brooks's phone rang. He answered it, listening for a moment before his face went pale. "The CEO is here? Coming to HR?" He stammered into the phone. "Why wasn't I informed?" "Because," Sarah said clearly, straightening her posture and dropping her time-at intern demeanor, "she's already here." The transformation in Sarah's presence was immediate and striking. Gone was the meek intern persona, replaced by the confident bearing of a CEO. The room fell silent as understanding dawned on the faces around her, all except Brooks, who was still clutching his phone in confusion. "What is this? What's going on?" he demanded, but his voice had lost its edge of authority. Sarah smiled, no longer playing a role. "Mr. Brooks, I believe it's time for your performance review. And trust me, your brother-in-law's board position won't be a factor in this discussion." The transformation in the break room was immediate. Brooks's face cycled through multiple emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, dawning horror, as he stared at Sarah Chen, no longer the meek intern he had tormented for weeks, but the CEO of the entire company. This is impossible," Brooks stammered, his earlier bravado evaporating. "You can't be." Sarah Chen, CEO and majority shareholder of Stellar Software Solutions, she finished for him, her voice clear and authoritative. "I've been observing your management style firsthand for the past 3 weeks. It's been enlightening." The other employees in the room were watching the scene unfold with a mixture of shock and growing satisfaction. Jenny's hand was still recording everything on her phone, capturing the moment Brooks finally realized the true magnitude of his mistake. "Mrs. Morris," Sarah turned to the HR director, "please escort Mr. Brooks to the conference room. I believe we need to have a detailed discussion about his conduct, particularly the events of the past hour." Brooks found his voice again. "This is entrapment," he protested. "You can't do this. I'll call my lawyer." "Please do," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm sure they'd be very interested in watching the security footage of you assaulting an employee, who happens to be the company's CEO, while making discriminatory remarks. Not to mention the hundreds of documented incidents we collected over the past 3 weeks." 2 security guards appeared at the door. Janet Morris gestured toward the conference room. "Mr. Brooks, this way please." As Brooks was led out, still protesting, Sarah turned to address the gathered employees. "I owe you all an explanation," she began, her voice softening. "When we acquired Stellar Software 3 months ago, we received numerous reports about discrimination and hostile work environment issues. But previous investigations had gone nowhere." "Because of his brother-in-law," Jenny added, understanding dawning on her face. "Exactly," Sarah nodded. "The only way to understand the true scope of the problem was to experience it firsthand. What I discovered was worse than we imagined. A culture of fear, systematic discrimination, and abuse of power." The room had grown quiet as everyone listened. Some were nodding, others had tears in their eyes as years of pent-up frustration finally found validation. "Starting today, things will change," Sarah continued. "I've seen your talent, your dedication, and your resilience firsthand. I've also seen how Brooks's leadership has stifled innovation and created a toxic environment that goes against everything this company should stand for." Michael, the developer whose presentation Brooks had sabotaged, raised his hand. "What about his brother-in-law on the board?" Sarah smiled. "The board was informed of this investigation when it began. They'd fully support the actions we're taking today. In fact," she checked her phone, "they're convening an emergency meeting right now to discuss both Brooks's termination and his brother-in-law's position." Janet Morris returned to the break room. "The legal team is ready in the conference room," she announced. "And Mr. Brooks's lawyer is on the way." Sarah nodded and turned back to the employees. "I need to deal with this situation now, but tomorrow morning we're having a company-wide meeting. It's time to rebuild this workplace into what it always should have been, a place where talent and hard work matter more than anything else." As she headed toward the door, Jenny stepped forward. "Sarah, I mean, Ms. Chen," she corrected herself quickly. "Sarah is fine," she assured her. "Thank you," Jenny said simply, but her eyes conveyed much more. "For believing us, for caring enough to do this." Sarah squeezed her hand. "Thank you for your courage. All of you. I saw how you supported each other, documented everything, and kept fighting despite the fear. That's the kind of culture we're going to build on." As Sarah walked toward the conference room where Brooks awaited, she could feel the atmosphere in the office already beginning to change. Hope was replacing fear, and employees were standing taller, speaking more freely. The coffee stain on her shirt had dried into a brown mark, a small price to pay for exposing the truth and beginning the process of real change. Behind her, she could hear the buzz of excited conversations, people finally feeling free to share their stories and ideas. The hard work of transforming the company culture was just beginning, but the biggest obstacle to that transformation was about to face the consequences of his actions. The conference room had transformed into an impromptu tribunal. On one side sat Brooks with his hastily summoned lawyer, a nervous-looking man in a rumpled suit who had clearly rushed over. On the other side sat Sarah, now wearing a blazer over her coffee-stained shirt, flanked by Janet Morris and the company's legal team. "Let's review the events of the past 3 weeks," Sarah began, her laptop open to a detailed spreadsheet. "Starting with your first interaction with intern Sarah Thompson, where you stated, and I quote, 'Don't expect special treatment just because of some diversity quota.'" Brooks's lawyer leaned over to whisper something to his client, but Brooks waved him off. "This is ridiculous. You deceived me. You can't use any of this evidence." "Actually," We can, the company's head lawyer replied, sliding a document across the table. As CEO, Ms. Chen has every right to assess workplace conditions through direct observation. Nothing about this investigation was illegal. Sarah clicked through her presentation. In 3 weeks, we documented 47 instances of direct discrimination, 23 cases of project sabotage targeting minority employees, and 12 incidents of verbal harassment. All of this is supported by witness statements, recordings, and security footage. The screens around the conference room came to life, showing clips from various incidents. Brooks watched in growing horror as his own face appeared again and again, each clip showing him belittling, discriminating, or harassing employees. And then there's today's incident, Sarah continued, touching her still tender chest where the coffee had burned her. Physical assault, caught on multiple cameras, witnessed by 30 employees while making explicitly discriminatory statements. Brooks's lawyer cleared his throat. My client was under considerable stress. Let me handle this. Brooks interrupted, standing up suddenly. Listen here, you pulled a bait and switch. You came in here pretending to be someone else. Everything I did was justified from a management perspective. These people needed a firm hand. A firm hand? Sarah repeated calmly. Is that what you call deleting Michael's presentation, or telling Maria her accent was too thick, or threatening Jenny's job when she tried to help a colleague? The lawyer was now frantically tugging at Brooks's sleeve, trying to get him to sit down and stop talking. But Brooks was too far gone in his rage and indignation. You have no idea what it takes to maintain standards, he shouted. These diversity hires come in here with their fancy degrees, thinking they deserve special treatment. Someone had to keep them in line. Janet Morris was carefully recording every word, while the legal team exchanged satisfied glances. Brooks was burying himself deeper with every statement. Keep them in line? Sarah's voice remained steady. Like Jenny, who identified a critical security flaw that could have cost us millions, or Michael, whose client presentation you deleted, not knowing I'd already seen his excellent work, or Maria, who left us for our competitor and just helped them land the Anderson contract. Brooks fell silent, finally seeming to realize how thoroughly he had been exposed. His lawyer buried his face in his hands. Here's what's going to happen, Sarah said, sliding another document across the table. This is your termination letter, effective immediately. Your brother-in-law has already resigned from the board to avoid a conflict of interest in this matter. You can't do this to me, Brooks whispered, but his voice had lost all its previous authority. We can and we are, Sarah replied. You have 1 hour to clean out your desk, under security supervision. The company will be pressing charges for assault, and several employees have already indicated they'll be filing individual harassment suits. Brooks slumped in his chair, finally silent. His lawyer began reading the termination document, occasionally wincing at the detailed list of offenses. One last thing, Sarah added, standing up. Those diversity hires you were so concerned about, they're now your former company's greatest asset. While you were busy discriminating against them, they were driving innovation, improving our products, and showing exactly why diversity makes us stronger. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Mr. Brooks? The coffee stain might come out of my shirt, but the evidence of your discrimination will remain permanently in your employment record. As Sarah walked out of the conference room, she could see employees gathered in small groups, watching through the glass walls. The atmosphere had changed dramatically. Where there had once been fear, there was now relief and hope. The hard work of rebuilding the company culture could finally begin, starting with the empty office that had once belonged to Richard Brooks. The day after Brooks's termination, Sarah stood before the entire company in the main conference hall. Every seat was filled, with some employees standing along the walls. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. She clicked to the first slide of her presentation, showing the compilation of data gathered during her 3 weeks undercover. The graphs and charts told a stark story of systematic discrimination. Project assignments, promotion rates, and resource allocation all skewed heavily against minority employees. This isn't just about one manager's bad behavior, Sarah continued. This is about a system that allowed that behavior to flourish. Today, we start fixing that system. Jenny raised her hand from the front row. What about the employees who enabled Brooks? Some team leaders knew what was happening but never spoke up. Sarah nodded, appreciating the direct question. We're conducting a thorough review of all management positions. Those who actively participated in discrimination will face appropriate consequences. However, she paused, looking around the room, we also understand that many stayed silent out of fear. We're offering amnesty to employees who come forward now with information about past incidents. The next slide showed a complete reorganization of the department structure. Gone was the hierarchical system that had concentrated power in Brooks's hands. In its place was a more collaborative model, with multiple team leads and clear accountability measures. Maria Rodriguez, Sarah announced, and a familiar face appeared on the video conference screen. It was the developer who had left the company due to Brooks's discrimination, has agreed to return as our new head of development. Applause broke out, especially loud from the technical teams who had worked with Maria before. Her expertise had been sorely missed. Additionally, Sarah continued once the applause died down, we're implementing several immediate changes. First, all projects will now have diverse team leads. Second, we're establishing an independent review board for complaints about discrimination or harassment. And third, we're creating a mentorship program specifically designed to support and advance underrepresented employees. Michael, whose presentation Brooks had sabotaged, stood up. What about the ongoing projects? Some of us have been stuck on dead-end assignments for months. Excellent question, Sarah replied. Starting next week, all project assignments will be reviewed and redistributed based on skills and experience, not personal bias. Your deleted presentation, Michael. I'd like you to give it to the full development team on Monday. The energy in the room was shifting from anxiety to enthusiasm as Sarah outlined more changes. New training programs, revised promotion criteria, regular cultural assessments, and an anonymous feedback system. But the most important change, Sarah emphasized, isn't in any policy or procedure. It's in our expectations of each other. From today forward, every employee at every level is expected to speak up against discrimination. No more silent witnesses. She clicked to a slide showing Brooks's now empty office. This space will be converted into our new innovation lab, where teams can collaborate on projects regardless of their department or position. The walls that divided us are coming down, literally and figuratively. As the presentation concluded, Sarah opened the floor for questions. Hands shot up across the room, and for the next hour, she addressed concerns, clarified policies, and listened to suggestions for further improvements. One last thing, Sarah said as the meeting drew to a close. To everyone who endured discrimination, who had their talents ignored, who felt they had to stay quiet to keep their jobs, I apologize on behalf of the company. We failed you. But starting today, we're building something better, together. After the meeting, employees lingered in groups, discussing the changes with growing optimism. Jenny approached Sarah with tears in her eyes. When you first came as an intern, she said, I tried to warn you about Brooks, to protect you from what we'd all been through. I never imagined you were actually there to protect us. Sarah hugged her spontaneously, breaking CEO protocol but not caring. You did protect me, Jenny. You and everyone else who documented everything, who supported each other, who kept fighting despite the fear. You showed me exactly what this company could be. As Sarah watched the employees leave the conference hall, talking animatedly about new projects and possibilities, she knew the hard work was just beginning. Changing a company's culture wouldn't happen overnight, but with Brooks gone and new systems in place, real change was finally possible. And it all started with a cup of coffee thrown in anger by a man who never imagined his diversity hire intern was actually his boss. 6 months after Brooks's termination, Stellar Software Solutions had transformed into a different company. The physical changes were immediately visible. The innovation lab buzzed with activity where Brooks's office once stood. Walls had been removed to create open collaborative spaces, and teams were integrated across all departments. Ready for the big announcement? Jenny asked, now wearing her new team lead badge with pride. Her promotion had been one of many changes that reflected the company's new merit-based culture. More than ready, Sarah smiled. Is everyone here? Almost. Maria's team is just finishing their client presentation, the one that landed us the biggest contract in company history. The main conference hall was packed when Sarah took the stage. On the screen behind her, Numbers told the story of the past 6 months. Project completion rates up 40%. Employee satisfaction increased by 65%. And most importantly, innovation metrics had doubled. 6 months ago, Sarah began, we stood in this room and promised change. Today, we're here to celebrate that change and announce something special. She clicked to the first slide, showing a headline from that morning's business news. Stellar Software Solutions launches industry-first Inclusion Innovation Fund. Thanks to our record-breaking performance this quarter, Sarah continued, we're establishing a $10 million fund to support tech startups founded by underrepresented entrepreneurs. And who better to lead this initiative than our own Jenny Patel? Applause erupted as Jenny joined Sarah on stage. She had grown from the nervous employee who once feared Brooks' retaliation into a confident leader who mentored others and championed innovative ideas. But that's not all, Sarah announced once the applause died down. Michael's security protocol, the one Brooks tried to suppress, has been approved for patent. It's already being licensed by 3 major tech companies. Michael, now heading his own development team, grinned from the front row. His story had become a symbol of the company's transformation, from having his presentation deleted to leading industry-changing innovations. And finally, Sarah said, I'm proud to announce that Stellar Software Solutions has been named one of the top 10 most inclusive workplaces in tech. The article specifically mentions our mentorship program, which has become a model for other companies. As Sarah continued highlighting achievements, she noticed a small commotion at the back of the hall. A security guard was quietly escorting someone out, Richard Brooks, who had tried to slip in unnoticed. Speaking of changes, Sarah smoothly continued, I'm sure some of you noticed our unwelcome visitor. Mr. Brooks's discrimination lawsuit was dismissed last week, and the restraining order remains in effect. His attempt to paint himself as the victim failed when faced with our evidence and your testimonies. The room remained focused on Sarah, barely acknowledging Brooks's attempted intrusion. His power over them was gone, replaced by a culture of mutual respect and support. Let's talk about the future. Sarah moved on, revealing the company's ambitious 5-year plan. It included expanding the Innovation Lab into a full research center, launching a scholarship program for underrepresented students, and developing new tools to support inclusive workplace practices. As the meeting concluded, employees lingered to chat and celebrate. Sarah watched as teams mixed freely, developers brainstorming with marketing, HR collaborating with engineering, new interns confidently sharing ideas with senior staff. Remember when we used to hide by the coffee machine to avoid Brooks? Jenny remarked, standing beside Sarah. Now look at us. Sarah nodded, thinking about her 3 weeks as an intern. The coffee stain had long since been cleaned from her shirt, but she kept it as a reminder of why their mission mattered. We're not just creating software anymore, Sarah replied. We're creating change. Later that evening, as Sarah prepared to leave, she passed the wall of employee photos, a new edition that showcased the diverse faces that made up their company family. Among them was a small frame containing her Intern ID badge, preserved as a reminder of the journey that had brought them here. The lesson was clear. Sometimes the most powerful position from which to effect change wasn't from the top down, but from the ground up. Sarah had needed to experience discrimination firsthand to truly understand how to fight it, and now, Stellar Software Solutions stood as proof that inclusion wasn't just the right thing to do. It was the key to innovation, growth, and success. As she turned off the lights in her office, Sarah smiled at how far they'd come from that day when an angry manager threw coffee at an intern, not knowing she was the CEO who would change everything.